Dear friends, colleagues, partners, be welcome to this site event, Culture and Accelerator Underused, realizing the potential of culture for short-term recovery and long-term sustainable development. We kindly ask you all to mute your microphones and to use them when you have the floor. Thank you very much. The first words of this event are in memory of the victims of the COVID-19 pandemic. May they rest in peace. We want to convey our sincere condolences to the families and to the friends of the victims. This event is organized by the Global Campaign Culture 2030 Goal in the frame of the United Nations High-Level Political Forum 2020. We are a group of global and international cultural networks. We are convinced that processes related to culture, that is heritage, creativity, and diversity, are at the core of life and must be at the core of sustainable development. We are convinced that sustainable development will only be achieved if its cultural dimension is explicitly acknowledged in international and national agendas and becomes fully operational in short-term, mid-term, and long-term policies and programs. If we truly want the UN 2030 agenda to be people-centered, then we need culture to be recognized as a pillar of sustainable development. We know, you know, everybody knows that cultural initiatives and practices are drivers of freedoms and rights, and they bring meaning and motivation and provide coherence to the implementation and localization of the agenda. We have cooperated, the networks of the Culture 2030 Goal campaign, we have cooperated since 2013. We have published 4 position papers on the role that culture should play in the 2030 agenda. We promoted a culture goal as the best way of ensuring this. Conditions did not exist in 2015 for this goal to be adopted, unfortunately. But of course, we carry on. Our commitment remains. We are taking up our responsibility and we have connected our work to the implementation of the UN Agenda 2030. Today, we will show how this commitment and this responsibility is unfolding with concrete actions and explore how to take this further. We will share the results of our report on the voluntary national reviews, VNRs, published in September 2019, as well as our statement on the COVID-19 pandemic, published in April 2020. This, our statement ensuring culture fulfills its potential in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, was very recently endorsed by the President of the UN General Assembly, His Excellency Tijani Mohamed Bande. We are deeply grateful and feel very honored by this endorsement. Now, I invite His Excellency Mr. Jerobeam Shaanika, Deputy Chief of Cabinet of the President of the UN General Assembly, to say the opening words of this event. Mr. Shaanika, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Pascal. I extend the greeting from the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Tijani Mohamed Bande, to the 2030 Goal Coalition for inviting him to address today's HLPF side event. Unfortunately, the President of the General Assembly was unable to join the discussion today. However, he asked that I read the following statement on his behalf. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants on this virtual platform, I thank the Culture 2030 Goal Coalition for convening today's timely discussion on realizing the potential for culture for short-term recovery and long-term sustainable development. It is my pleasure to endorse the Culture 2030 Goal Statement entitled, Ensuring Culture Fulfill its Potential in Responding to the COVID pandemic. COVID-19 poses an unprecedented global challenge that requires inclusive responses from all members of society. I welcome this initiative to mobilize culture, community, and sector in support of COVID-19 relief and recovery efforts. Culture brings inspiration, comfort, and hope into people's lives and promotes well-being and resilience. This is particularly important during the challenging times such as this pandemic. Culture also has a fundamental role in guaranteeing access to information and encouraging intercultural exchange, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence. This call to action will galvanize the multilateral effort to fulfill potential of culture as we build better and create the future we want. This is especially important in this moment, as the interlinkage between culture and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development are becoming more evident to experts and policymakers. Furthermore, I commend UNESCO and WHO for their groundbreaking reports late last year, highlighting art and culture's wide-ranging impact on the SDGs. This impact spans environmental action, societal resilience, prosperity and livelihood, knowledge and skill, and inclusion and participation. In addition, this report highlighted the impact of culture in promoting overall good health, preventing mental and physical ill health, and treating or managing acute and chronic conditions. Let there be no mistake, incorporating culture into COVID-19 recovery plan can thus help accelerate the 2030 Agenda implementation. Excellencies, today's convening will support efforts to further develop policy framework, to mainstream the leverage culture's contribution to the SDG implementation. As is the case with COVID response efforts, achieving the 2030 Agenda in its entirety will only be possible with the participation of all stakeholders and sectors of the society. Culture has the power to communicate the agenda to general public. This will potentially attract new partnership in support for sustainable development. Moreover, culture can also help to strengthen support for inter-civilization dialogue and multilateralism. Excellency, education has been a key priority for the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. As I firmly believe in education is the great equalizer, however, I'm concerned that failing to offer adequate protections for culture and cultural practitioners during this pandemic might trigger a long-term deterioration in the richness and diversity of cultural sectors manifestation from heritage site, museum, library, archive to practice and contemporary cultural expression. These resources are prized repositories of knowledge and experience passed through generation, which strengthen humanity's capacity to overcome adversity and envision a better future. These resources enrich education ecosystem and lifelong learning and contribute to overall quality of life by empowering people in their search for meaning and purpose through historical and artistic reflection. We will need this intellectual and creative capacity more than ever in a post-COVID world. I call on government, UN agencies, and all stakeholders to endorse the Culture 2030 goal statement and reflect upon and act in pursuit of its guiding principles. We must reach out to build bridges and foster new partnership to create the future we want. It is only by striving together, it is only by working together, we will be able to respond appropriately to COVID-19 and succeed in delivering for all. I thank you, and this is the message that the President of the General Assembly asked me to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Shah-Anika. Can I kindly invite you and all the panelists to switch the video on so that we are allowed to see each other, and so that the audience can also see us on a screen. Thank you very much, Mr. Shah-Anika. We feel extremely honored by the endorsement of His Excellency, the President of the General Assembly, and congratulations for your excellent speech. We feel again honored and very proud of this endorsement and of your speech. Now I will give the floor to Dr. Ege Yildirim, the SDGs focal point of ICOMOS. She will explain the report that we wrote in September 2019, Culture in the Implementation of the SDGs. Ege, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jordi. Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, it is an honor and pleasure for me to be part of this event on behalf of ICOMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, which is a committed partner of the Culture 2030 Goal campaign. We are a global NGO dedicated to the conservation of cultural heritage places and advisory body for the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. And I'll be presenting the report on behalf of our campaign, the drafting of which ICOMOS was tasked with, along with contributions from our partners. As Jordi said, it was launched last September on the occasion of the SDG Summit, and submitted to the HLPF 2020 as well as an input on the inputs platform. So next, please. Next slide. Thank you. So just going back very quickly to the background of the report, how it was initiated, we have the driving question in our campaign: how can culture contribute as a fourth pillar of sustainable development? Well, there's the policymaking aspect, of course, the global agendas, and we have some explicit and implicit mentions and targets such as SDG 11.4 and the New Urban Agenda references to culture, which give us a base, but we would like to improve much more on this, but this is our starting point. And the second stage or aspect, next please, would be how to implement these policies. Next slide. And how is culture addressed in the implementation, which would mean that we would need to, no, one before please. Stephen, yes, thank you. So how culture is addressed in the implementation, which is through the SDG reviews every year in the HLPF, and specifically, most importantly, at the VNRs, the voluntary national reviews. So this report of the campaign addressed this particular period. Next slide, please. And the scope of the report consists of a stock taking of the first years of implementation after 2015, how culture and associated concepts are in VNRs, but also in parallel policy documents and other stakeholder inputs, and very importantly, local governments, VLRs, because they are now starting to submit voluntary local reviews as well. And finally, we have some key recommendations for the way forward. Next, please. Next slide. So in the analysis, we had a qualitative and a quantitative aspect. In the qualitative analysis, we actually encountered some very important exemplary ways that countries addressed culture in their national sustainable development strategies. Can we go back one slide, please? The slides seem to be dancing a little bit. They're excited like we are. One slide before, please. I would just like to have you see how, for example, the Vanuatu VNR actually featured on their cover their own set of of goals, where number one was cultural identity. They have talked about the spirit of the Ni Vanuatu people as guiding the whole process of implementation. Montenegro has talked about the importance of culture for quality of life. Greece has talked about both the direct and indirect contributions in multiple forms of culture. And Latvia has made a point about how creativity fosters abstract thinking and excellence in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. So these are some of the qualitative ways that we were happy to see some ways that culture is already present. Moving on, and there were some more implicit references in the next slide, which is how we can say a picture can tell 1,000 words. We see so many references visually to cultural aspects. Although they are not always explicitly written in the texts, they make a point, they illustrate points that countries want to make with snapshots of how their local life, their local context, their daily life actually goes on, and culture is everywhere in it, as you can see for yourselves. Next slide, please. Moving on to the quantitative analysis, here we did quite a simple exercise, actually. It was just counting words, which actually did yield some interesting results themselves. We looked at how culture, cultural, and other related keywords were featured in the reports, and especially tried to put this in context in a comparison to make more sense with the other keywords, the 3 pillars of sustainable development: society, economy, and the environment. And you will see how cultural references lag behind. When you put them all together in a pie, culture takes 5% and the others are in the 20s and 30s range. Looking at the average word count per country's VNR reports, there is a statistical figure which may not immediately mean something, 0.17, but this was actually useful in seeing how year by year there were little fluctuations. And in the year when a explicitly culture-related goal, SDG 11 in 2018, when that was reviewed, there was a spike up. So maybe this is a hint that having explicit target goals helps countries reference culture more. We also did a very simple ranking as a healthy competition between countries, and the most frequent references to culture were found in Italy, and we're very grateful to have our Italian delegation representative here with us today. Cyprus, Palau, Greece, New Zealand, Portugal, Serbia, Latvia, Turkey, and Qatar were countries that led the way here. Next slide, please. Looking one slide before, yes. And here you see there were a very diverse range of cultural connotations used, with heritage, institutions, diversity, rights, knowledge, traditions, buildings, character. Also, there were other concepts which culture is very closely interacting with, such as gender, education, resources, cities, and these were also commonly found. What we did not find actually was a keyword in the VNR page on the HLPF website. You can see a list of keywords for search, and there are 32 of them, and there's nothing on culture. So perhaps that is one point we can take up for the future. Thank you. Next slide, please. Looking at the key findings, as we said, there are very interesting, diverse types of evidence of cultural policies that countries are making sincere efforts to mainstream into their reports. These range from strategic elements and values to elements of people and planet and resilience, and also the issue of quantifying progress in culture. But overall, we still found it limited for the reasons mentioned previously. And we do see that the potential for relating culture to the SDGs is a large potential, which is still untapped. You can see here some of the SDGs that are predominantly featuring in relation to culture, and the sizes of the icons give you an idea of their ranking. So 11 cities is ahead, and quality education is also important here. Moving on, next slide, please. The local level was a special section of our exercise in the analysis. And we did find that in VLRs, culture is a crucial component identified for achievement of the SDGs. Every year we have more cities joining this movement of VLR making. I think we will see this continue, a very promising sign. Next slide, please. All of these findings and reflections consolidated themselves in our avenues of action for all stakeholders to accelerate both this agenda and future agendas post 2030, which we're also already trying to think ahead for. And in this, we would recommend that all stakeholders consider culture from the outset in national development planning, have wider consultation mechanisms, including cultural actors, have a coherent global community around culture, have a UN high-level meeting on culture, and have better dissemination of existing evidence and collection of new data. Improvements, promote local SDG implementation in context of local cultural actors, and also looking at ourselves to be self-critical, we should strengthen our own efforts as the cultural sector in mainstreaming into the SDGs. So we are very committed to continuing the development and promotion of these partnerships. Next slide, please. So I'm really wrapping up here, but I would like to share with you a couple of more words on the importance of the people-centered agenda. There is a personal reflection I'd like to share on the power of people's attachment to cultural heritage. This is a quote from a friend of mine in Istanbul, who just shared with me this recent note. And this is about the transcending timeless power of cultural heritage, really. It was the end of May 2020. It was my first day out after the lockdown. After 2 months spent at home, I wanted to be just near her that day. I wanted to know that she is still there. In the most troubled times of my life, she's always been good. It has always been good to look at her, even from afar. Her holy wisdom has always been like medicine for me and my city. This has been the case for 1,500 years, and it will continue to be so after we're all long gone. She will continue to spread her wisdom to the whole world. So culture is an invaluable driver and enabler for communities to be healthy, to thrive and be sustainable. And thank you for your time, and looking forward to more questions and discussion. Thank you, Jordi.
Thank you very much, Ege. Must I recall that the report is available in our website, full report in English, with executive summaries in English, Spanish, and French. Now the floor goes to Stephen Wyber, Manager, Policy and Advocacy of the International Federation of Libraries Associations, to explain our statement, the Culture and COVID-19 statement. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jordi, and thank you in particular to Your Excellency, Mr. Sharnika, for your powerful words. I'm Stephen Wyber, Manager Policy and Advocacy at the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, or IFLA for short. We're proud to be members of the Culture 2030 Goal Coalition, bringing the experience, resources, and energy of libraries globally to the table. Following Ege's presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit, as Jordi said, about the Culture COVID-19 statement. Why another statement? Among the members of the coalition, we certainly had this discussion, given the excellent work already done at the global level by UNESCO and also at the regional and national levels. However, we saw the need to make the connection clearly and openly between culture, COVID-19, and the UN 2030 agenda. The same logic of interlinkages and synergies that applies across the SDGs applies also, and indeed acutely so, to the response to COVID-19. In welcoming the decision to focus this year's high-level political forum on COVID-19, we wanted it to be clear that now, more than ever, culture, cultural actors, and cultural concerns need to be at the center, not the periphery of policymaking, both in order to minimize the negative consequences of the pandemic on the cultural sector, but also to realize its potential. As set out in the statement itself, and in addition to recognizing clearly the extraordinary contribution of those in the health sector and other essential services, we saw a number of key factors at work. that the cultural community was stepping up in order to help today, giving comfort and support to people facing extraordinary stresses and dislocation, that culture plays a role in helping us to conceive of a new future, inspiring and enabling us to change, that taking cultural concerns into account can help us recognize the impacts of policies on different groups and combat exclusion, that culture can help us build understanding both across borders and within communities, but also that many individuals and institutions in the cultural sector or who rely on it are facing grave uncertainty. This raises the concern that just when we need culture and creativity most, the sector may struggle to be there. These trends lead us to the following recommendations: that we need to act today to ensure that culture is there for us tomorrow, including through showing flexibility in funding programs and laws, that we need to integrate culture into government action at all levels, and in turn, make equality, sustainability, and international cooperation central to cultural policies, that we need to act to guarantee cultural rights for all, including through education, active participation, critical citizenship, gender equality, and the empowerment of indigenous peoples, and that we need to incorporate a culture explicitly into the plans, instruments, and reporting mechanisms around the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs to be elaborated in the coming months and years. On behalf of the Coalition, I therefore strongly encourage you to join the 250 plus organizations, institutions, and individuals from all around the world who have already signaled their support. We hope, in building support around these messages, that to be able to deliver fully on the potential of culture as a development accelerator and as a driver of transformative change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Stephen. Very clear message, very good summary of the statement. Let me add that the statement is in our website, open for signatories, currently in English, French, Spanish, Swedish, Turkish, and Italian, and very soon, later this week, in Portuguese. Now it is my honor to give the floor to Mr. Ernesto Ottone, Assistant Director General for Culture of UNESCO. Muchas gracias, Ernesto, por estar con nosotros esta tarde, esta mañana.
Hola, Jordi.
En América. Adelante.
Sorry, I was a little bit late. I was in seminars the whole morning, so I was a little bit late, sorry. So, well, I'm very pleased to be with you today. I would like to start by welcoming the initiative of the Culture 2030 Goal campaign, which has just been presented to us. I read it before, but it's very important. I feel that the statement and the report will be the key accelerator or share their thoughts to advocate for culture in the 2030 agenda. I was lately also in a lot of meetings, seminars with the General Secretary and in other meetings during this French confinement and now American confinement. And as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has hit very hard the culture sector. When we report about the many World Heritage sites that were closed and performing arts and cultural practices interrupted, right now, 2 months ago, we had more than 93% of all World Heritage sites closed. Right now, we are in 59, so it looks better, but we never know what will happen. But what's happened that has been weakened, and the fundamental right to access to culture has been curtailed. The crisis has starkly exposed the pre-existing vulnerability of the cultural sector. It's not new, but right now it's exposed everywhere and in every country, and that's what is the most important. That's why the effect is so global. The social rights and livelihoods of cultural workers were particularly weakened. Many cultural institutions around the world suffer severe are continuing to suffering from severe financial losses. We had an estimate from ICOM, from International Council of Museums, that 10 or 12% of all the museum, of the 95,000 museums that are existing in the world, may never reopen. And that's something for the diversity of cultural expression that it's very hard to express, to tell, but if it's true, it will mean a loss of the diversity that we've been trying to push and advocate in the last 20 or 30 years. As many countries experience confinement, the vital necessity of culture for social cohesion, education, and well-being was particularly brought to light. And that's something that everybody is recognizing. We had our executive board that finished Friday here in UNESCO, and that was pointed by, I will say, 90% of member states, that the crisis is very hard, that it will stay for a longer time than everybody imagined, and that the massive impact of this pandemic on the creative economy and the cultural tourism also revealed the essential underestimated economic weight of the culture sector. This crisis has shown that culture is highly adaptable and in many ways more accessible than ever thanks to digital technologies. Also, inequalities were also revealed. You have to know that 50% of the world don't have access to internet. So everything that we are talking are only getting to 50% of the population. And that's something that maybe when you hear that technology and digital means are replacing or giving a new possibility, no, it's true for the 50% of the world, not for the whole world. UNESCO mobilized its member states to support the response to the pandemic and ensure that culture was included in national recovery plans. An online meeting of the Minister of Culture was organized on 22 April. We brought together more than 130 Ministers of Culture for more than 7 hours and a half. It was the biggest marathon that I never made. And an online meeting of intergovernmental organization and development banks for the first time together was organized on 17 April also to foster partnerships toward the recovery of the culture sectors. Because at the end, the development banks and World Bank have or can build some instrument to get in touch with the policy that will and the packages that are being throwing by the authorities. Particular efforts were geared at documenting the impact of the crisis to inform the responses. We had during 3 months, 12 edition, a weekly tracker that was called Culture and COVID-19 Impact and Response that was published from April to July. And right now, up September, we're gonna issue it once per month to continue, because we have to ensure that the situation is dynamic. Right now, it's in America and in Africa, and we don't know what can happen. Several campaigns were launched to enhance dialogue on far-reaching impact of COVID-19 on the culture sector. And something important that we try to do is to create this movement that is called Resiliart. We had more than 107 online debates so far, and it is inclusively and closely oriented to civil society and to the culture workers, creators, and artists. It means what we are trying to do is to give the voice that you are working for many years, but somehow to ensure that these voices can reach governmental level, National Commission, delegation, and Minister of Culture, to ensure that at the end, people that are suffering, not because we are doing policy, because they are suffering because they don't have the means to continue to work, have to be heard once and for all, and have to be integrated in the policy that we are trying to push as an agenda. Well, we did a lot of virtual visit with Share Our Heritage. I know I have to cut, I know, but it has been such a difficult time, and at the same time so exponential way of introducing some of the works that you are doing, but in a policy level with member states in UNESCO, that it has been very important for the other sectors to understand, education, science, that the crisis that we are living is not only a systemic crisis, it's also a crisis that in the culture sector is coming from long away. What we see right now is the part of the iceberg that was not synced, but the whole structure, the ecosystem, it's in crisis. And we had a lot of debate inside UNESCO about why we took so long to advocate for the civil society, not only as NGOs, but also as individuals that today are suffering about the lackness of support to do the big picture. And I think that what you are doing, building on policy advices about knowledge building, cooperation, and advocacy effort, I'm convinced that we can prompt the contribution of culture to building a more sustainable future. But it's not anymore a sustainable goals. It's also a sustainable and resilient goals that we showed advocacy for. So thank you. Sorry, I took too long, but it's a very nice to see all. There's a lot of friends here, and somehow, Jordi, un gran apoyo para lo que están haciendo.
Muchas gracias, Director General Adjunto. Thank you very much, Assistant Director General. It is logical, we feel extremely close to all the initiatives that UNESCO has launched during the crisis. We are a member, a partner in this building a more multilateral world in which every single organization, initiative, person takes responsibility. And with this campaign, we are taking our responsibility with members, with partners, to make sure that culture is at the center of plans, and that this corresponds to the fact that culture is at the center of life, as the pandemic has shown all over the world. Now I will give the floor to Ilaria Ragnoni, spokesperson of the Permanent Mission of Italy to the United Nations. Ilaria, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting us to contribute to this important discussion and to give you an overview of what we did on culture during this emergency and view of the recovery. And indeed, the impact of the pandemic has not spared the cultural and artistic world. Cultures of schools, museums, theaters, institutions, the movement have struggled closely creative and cultural industry, jeopardized. Yes, can you hear me?
Your voice comes very cut. May I invite you to turn the video off and to check if your voice can reach us more clearly without the video?
Let's try this way. Can you hear me better?
Yes, much better. This is much better. Thank you very much. Grazie.
Perfect. So as I was saying, during the emergency, culture has proven to be a very powerful tool to promote the well-being and resilience of our community in a time of physical distancing. And I have to say, culture is really the backbone of Italy's identity and economy. And access to education and culture has been central in Italy's response to the emergency. Efforts to harness the potential of digitalization have been accelerated to provide educational and cultural services despite lockdown measures. Through social media and traditional media campaigns supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Cultural Heritage and Tourism, and the Ministry of Education, a variety of cultural and educational materials have been made accessible to all. And this also helped us to send to the world a message of solidarity and resilience from one of the countries first and most hit by the pandemic. So campaigns like We Are Italy, Fare Cinema, Estate all'Italiana have made available to the public a great variety of materials like virtual visits to museums or movies, basically that everybody could enjoy from home and free of any charge. Of course, all these initiatives has also highlighted the relevance of connectivity for the enjoyment of fundamental rights and the need to improve access for all to avoid new forms of exclusion or discrimination. Second point, culture, education, and innovation must be at the core of our recovery strategies if we aim at building back better. And so I think your effort of advocacy is extremely important for this purpose. And this was also the message sent by the Italian Ministers of Education, Azzolina, and Minister of Culture, Franceschini, at the UNESCO special meetings convened to discuss the impact of the pandemic. And the fundamental message here is that we need a coordinated international response to the pandemic, by solidarity, innovation, and taking into account also the cultural sector. In view of the recovery, the Italian government has put in place a set of targeted measures to support the cultural and artistic sectors, like extraordinary subsidies, incentives, emergency funds, I say the recent visit of the UN World Tourism Organization Secretary General in Italy for the launch of the Restart Tourism campaign really confirmed Italy's commitment to making culture and tourism a pillar of sustainable economic recovery, and as such a key driver to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs, especially as we embark on the last decade of action. And I have to underline that Italy has put, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, we have put environmental, economic, and social sustainability at the heart of our recovery plan, including in the sector, and we're promoting this approach also at the multilateral level. Other key elements definitely are digitalization, as I was saying, inclusion with a special attention to engaging youth, and the participation, the engagement of the civil society and the private sector. So the idea is to build multi-stakeholder partnerships also regarding to culture. One last point that I would make is that as we face the needs that are emerging from the pandemic, at the same time, we must not forget the importance of preserving cultural heritage. We see the pandemic has exacerbated the risk of abandonment, of trafficking, of destruction of cultural heritage in conflict and crisis situation, but not only. So Italy has always been at the forefront of this effort to protect cultural heritage as a partner of UNESCO in the Unite for Heritage initiative. We promoted a groundbreaking resolution, the 2347, during our mandate in the Security Council in 2017 on the protection of cultural heritage. We have a specialized unit of the Carabinieri for the protection of cultural heritage, and we are co-chairing a group of friends on this issue here at the UN. So it's extremely important for us, and we think that investing in this effort is not only a part of our contribution to international peace and security, but also a testament to the fundamental values of multilateralism. As previous panelists have said, really cultural heritage and cultural diversity are a medium of dialogue and mutual understanding and inclusion. And we feel that these kind of values are extremely important, especially now that we face this unprecedented crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. We wish the best to the situation in Italy, to the recovery after the pandemic of your country, and we are very pleased to hear the central role that the plans are giving to culture with all the elements.
Thank you very much, Jordi. Thanks a lot.
Now I will give the floor to José Alfonso Suárez del Real, the Minister for Culture of Mexico City, as well as the co-president of the UCLG Culture Committee. He is my co-president. Secretario, tiene la palabra.
Thank you very much, Jordi. On behalf of Head of Government of Mexico City, Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, and of my own as co-president of USLG Cultural Committee, I extend a cordial greeting to all the speakers of this panel, and through her, I would like to acknowledge all the frontline responders that from their cities and countries have confronted with conviction and commitment the right to health of humanity while highlighting the enormous work they have done in these times to keep the culture more alive than ever. The confinement that people have had to face at home as a measure of containment in the face of the expansion of COVID-19 has upset many of the foundations on which culture normally unfolds. The experience of the encounter, the collective, the way of sharing and living together in the public space, the common recreation. However, we have been able to observe how, despite the limitations derived from the health crisis, culture has found its ways and has gathered millions of confined beings in it. The inexhaustible trubing of all arts that has looked for any lawful an opportunity to occur despite the pandemic confirms how culture is the most human traits of society. The creative impulse, the will to share, the connect with others, or the desire to build and enjoy together is there and the origin of human groups and cities themselves, giving meaning to our existence even in crisis. Today, we know, therefore, more than ever that culture is creation and its resilience. In the face of the current pandemic, the cities have had to rethink new ways of organize our lives. This implies a huge challenge, but it's also open unsuspected opportunities to generate new public policies facing the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. I speak of a committee to work more firmly in caring for the environment and to ensure inclusive and solidary cultural rights that contribute to health, peace, well-being, and social justice. This is what USLG means when, in the decalogue of the COVID-19 pandemic, cultural is identified as an antidote to the crisis. It is important to reiterate it. The role of the culture in this pandemic has been key. At first, cultural helped us to cope the uncertainty confinement to go through the crisis. Culture has also served to express what is happening as well as to give meaning to all this experience. It has been a tool to articulate communities despite the physical distance, and now in some territories that have begun existing of the lockdown, it can become an engine to reactivate the economy from a new paradigm and a longer tide on unbridled consumerism to commodification of everything, individualism, and the depredation of nature. Only 4 of the 169 goals that make up the ODS contain explicit reference to culture, and despite this, we have been able to verify how culture has been a crucial engine for societies through this health crisis. For this reason, I consider that one of the objectives in the Cultural 2030 Goal campaign must affect, given the arguments that the historical context that we are going through in a strong presence of cultural rights in the public policies of cities, public policies that guarantee these cultural rights in health without distinction of races, sex, classes, gender, sexual orientation, or origin. We must also generate new effective mechanisms to broaden the horizon of social participation, and that it becomes a way from social rights to be demanded, fulfilled, guaranteed, and expanded. For this, it is necessary to defend that all people can express themselves from the richness that come with the diversity of cultural identities, that they can participate in a cultural life of their community or any given community they choose for it, as well as that they can create and express themselves freely. Also, in this it's very urgent. It's necessary to defend the right to memory and cultural heritage. Today, that we live confined, it is essential to make sure that children and young people do not forget that cities are their legacy. They belong to them, and although they cannot go outright now to the street, to museums to enjoy a concert or a festival in a public space, cities continue to be their legacy, their cultural heritage, and they can access them thanks to the technology that is characteristic of this digital generation. As adults, we must think of different ways to ensure that cities are within the reach of the new generation. Because of COVID-19, we have had to paralyze practically all areas in which everyday life unfolds to safeguard what is the most valuable in the cities, their inhabitants and visitors. It is not the goal for which cities were created, to protect human lives and make it flourish. With this learning in mind, we must emphasize culture in relations to human beings, a notion that comes alive in the cultural rights of all the inhabitants and visitors of cities. I believe that it's necessary to put our energy into guaranteeing these rights from all people, especially for the most vulnerable, so that we can create more solidarity cities, cities of resilience that are capable of imagining and innovating ways to overcome this crisis and inhabit as a community, a post-pandemic world that is sustainable for nature and humanity, in which all the sustainable development goals become a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretario. Muchas gracias. And thank you for this emphasis in solidarity. Much needed. Thank you. Gracias. Now the next speaker is Dr. Kirsty Duncan, Member of Parliament, Deputy Leader of the Government, Canada. Dr. Duncan, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, and it is an honor. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and privilege to join this extraordinary group of people and this important discussion. I come at this from a very different perspective as a scientist, as Canada's former Minister of Science, and as a member of Parliament, but one that I hope you will find useful. And I'll start with a story. Many years ago, I led an expedition to Svalbard, Norway, to search for the cause of the 1918 so-called Spanish influenza, which was the deadliest pandemic of the 20th century. The 1918 influenza killed upwards of 50 million people, more people than the Black Death of the Middle Ages, more people than all the fighting of the First World War, and it did it in about 18 to 24 months. I wanted to find the cause of the 1918 flu and test our modern drugs against it. I hope we could make a flu vaccine that would be effective against the virus and any mutation of it should it ever return. I had found diaries detailing the deaths of 6 young miners who had died of the 1918 flu and whose bodies were buried in the permafrost. I hoped that the frozen ground would have preserved the bodies and the virus. And after 6 years of planning, of working with the government of Norway, of respecting the families and the ethics and rights, I led a team of 17 world-leading male experts from Canada, Norway, the United Kingdom, and the United States to uncover the virus. I was 32 years of age and a woman leading an international expedition, And because of the challenges I faced, I've spent my adult life fighting for equality and diversity in science. The 1918 flu was a traumatic event. Doctors, medical professionals, and people seemed hesitant to talk about their experience. And because they were reluctant to talk or write about the flu, future generations weren't always aware of it. The 1918 flu wasn't covered in any of my textbooks. And it was not until a few years ago that I learned that my own grandmother's husband didn't die in World War I, as our family believed, but rather that he died in December 1918 of influenza. Despite its shocking mortality, historians largely ignored the 1918 flu until the 1970s, when they explored the epidemiology and the frightening nature of the disease. Later, they examined the social cultural aspects, including how the disease revealed class and ethnic tensions, and how governments responded and extended their powers. For decades, the 1918 flu was the forgotten pandemic, and for almost a century, it remained a medical mystery. There are lessons to be learned. The story of the people matters. The doctors, nurses, frontline workers, survivors, family members, and communities, and everyone's voices must be included. When people live through trauma, it is important that they have the opportunity to talk about their experiences, to be heard, and to heal. Going forward, we must be prepared. Governments, the private sector, the cultural sector, and international and non-governmental organizations. When we are not prepared, we face not only deadly impacts, but also devastating economic consequences and new inequalities and vulnerabilities. And a virus can quickly undo any economic progress, disrupt humanitarian aid, or impede the SDGs. In 1918 and 2020, poverty, hunger, health and well-being, gender equality, and economic status play a role in who gets sick, who gets treated, and who survives. We must also learn what we always learn following a pandemic, namely that science and public health matter, not just when we are in a crisis. We must share lessons, update and test pandemic plans, and ensure we are doing everything possible to protect the most vulnerable. It's important to understand that the pandemic has worsened long-standing gender and racial inequalities in science, and that more than ever, the world needs science, women, and all voices. And finally, we are one small planet with one human family. Disease knows no borders, and through the pandemic and beyond, we truly are in this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duncan. Very moving message, touching, full of strong content. Thank you very much. Now the next panelist is Dr. Daisy Van Coort from the University College London. She is the lead of the World Health Organization Europe report on culture and health. Dr. Van Coort, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can I just do a check if people can see my slide okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Like Dr. Duncan before, I also approached this topic as a scientist. I work in the UK, and my area of research is the impact of social determinants on health. I'm currently leading a major international program of research looking at the psychological and social consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And over the last few years, I've also been working with the World Health Organization, looking at the role of arts and culture in people's health. And I'm going to share with you some of the findings from our international report, which was published in December of last year. We were interested in looking at how the arts, including performing arts, culture, and heritage, can affect people's health. So we undertook a review of the literature. Our theoretical standpoint was that arts engagement consists of lots of different components that can affect health. So these can include aesthetic engagement, involvement of the imagination, use of the senses, emotion, cognitive stimulation, social interaction, physical activity, and many other components. And we hypothesized that these different components could trigger different psychological, physiological, social, and behavioral responses that could then help to prevent, manage, or treat health. So we looked at what literature had been proposed over the last 30 years, looking at these different relationships. And we looked at clinical trials, laboratory studies, interview studies, ethnographies, and analyses of big data. And we found over 3,000 published peer-reviewed studies on this topic. I'll share the link to the review in the chat to this group afterwards so you can all see it in more detail. But to give you a headline summary of what we found, we split these findings into two main sections of the report. The first looked at how the arts can help to prevent ill health and promote good health. So, for example, we found that the arts can support social determinants of health, including promoting social cohesion and reducing social inequalities. They can help in child development, such as mother-infant bonding, speech and language development, and educational attainment. They can support in caregiving in terms of how we understand and conceptualize health, but also in terms of the clinical skills and well-being of staff. They can help to prevent ill health by promoting well-being, positive mental health, helping to reduce negative effects of trauma or cognitive decline or frailty. And the arts are even linked in with longevity. Also, the arts can help in promoting healthy behaviors, including people's engagement with healthcare settings, in health communication, which we've seen very powerfully in previous epidemics and pandemics, and we've been seeing in COVID as well, helping to reduce health-related stigma, and also helping to reach marginalized groups. The arts also help in the management and treatment of illness, including helping to reduce symptoms of severe, mild, and moderate mental illness, playing an important role in hospitals and healthcare settings in the treatment of acute conditions and in patient experience, which we know is so linked with clinical outcomes. They can play a role in the management of neurodevelopmental and neurological disorders, and they can also support in the treatment of non-communicable diseases, whether this is in lifestyle, mental health, coping, or adherence to treatment. And finally, the arts play a very important role in end-of-life care, again, as we've been seeing in countries around the world in the management of COVID. So we made a number of policy recommendations to countries internationally on how they could be taking forward this work. And these are particularly relevant now, I feel, in the response to COVID. We need countries to acknowledge the growing evidence base, support the implementation of arts interventions where there is good evidence, and also to share good practice internationally so that countries can build on one another rather than having to reinvent the wheel. We also need more support for research, particularly on policy relevant areas, and this is again important following COVID. We need to recognise the added value that the arts bring, and so we need to make sure that there is free or affordable provision to the arts across every country. We need to help arts organisations to make health an important part of their mission statements so that they help to support health and well-being. And we need to make sure the public are aware about how the arts support health so that they know to use the arts to help themselves. And we also need to note the cross-sectoral nature of arts and health. We need to try and ensure that work can be done across different sectoral boundaries and different disciplines. We need stronger referrals between the health sector and the arts and cultural sectors. And we need to make sure that healthcare professionals are trained in understanding how the arts can support health. We've also published alongside this report an intersectoral brief that talks about how the arts can help to achieve sustainable development goals with a particular focus on health. Just as some examples, we've had evidence that the arts can help to promote well-being, which is in Sustainable Development Goal 3. They can support lifelong learning. The arts are a very good way of challenging society and making sure that we help to reduce inequalities. They can help with economic growth through providing employment opportunities, and they are major industrial sectors within many countries internationally. They can help to reduce inequalities, and they can play a role in promoting peaceful and inclusive societies. Again, I will share a link to this report. So as a final point, why the arts? Why not anything? Well, the arguments we've made for the arts across our reports from the World Health Organization is that they can provide solutions to challenges where we currently don't have solutions. And we see this a lot with health conditions where we can support but we cannot cure. The arts can help in that support. They're also often very cost effective because they tackle multiple different aspects of health and social determinants of health. And they also help us to achieve many different priorities already agreed globally, including priorities within Health 2020, which talk about working between sectors and building resilient communities, and supporting the WHO General Programme of Work, which again focuses on multi-sectorial action, increasing human capital, and accelerating action on non-communicable diseases. Finally, the arts are important because we've got challenges on resources, particularly in the wake of COVID. We need every sector to step up and play a role in the recovery from this, and the arts and cultural sector is incredibly well placed to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fancourt. When we say that life has culture at its center, the relation between culture and life is fundamental. Now we can see the evidences of this relation between arts, culture, health, and life. And I believe that it is very important, your message, to connect departments, ministries that are not often connected. But certainly this is one of the, we expect, outcomes of the crisis, or during the crisis, a very strong connection between health departments and arts and culture departments. Thank you again, Dr. Fancourt. The next speaker is Pierre Clavier Mabiala, President of the Arterial Network. Pierre, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, you all must excuse my bad English, but I can try. Thank you, dear Excellencies and dear colleagues. In Africa, the situation of the culture sector is very precarious and lively. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, few states were able to recognize the place of the culture and therefore give this sector the place it needs in the development process. In several countries, the debate on culture is still at the level of the real role to be played by culture. It is quite wrong that the rules do not offer a framework for cultural expression, because the truth is very correct according to the fact that the more culture is taken into account, the more real the place of each citizen will be in the construction of the inclusive and peaceful society. At the level of our Pan-African Arterial Network for the promotion of the culture sector in Africa, the experimentation of the program African Creative City provide, though, the model of Ségou in Mali, that a culture life allowing the community to promote the value of intercultural dialogue, social cohesion, living together, the expression of cultural diversity necessarily leads to citizens feeling involved in the daily management of the community, which generates resolution of several social and even economic conflict, which slow down the development of community, of society, therefore of state. Giving room to culture means allowing all population to feel taken into account, to feel concerned in the effort to build an exemplary, peaceful society in which all life is harmony, and therefore with the sole ambition of contributing to development. The action of culture will have a grading impact and will install solid foundation when it is done with and on the ground at the level of the community, at the base, by questioning the citizen who becomes an actor of social and economic transformation using tool and instrument of the culture. In the culture dimension is promoted from the grassroots at local community level. The visibility of the result will be very palpable and will appeal more to the states, which will be obliged to understand the approach and adapt it to the state level. And unfortunately today, this vision of using and taking advantage of the different and multiply mean that culture offers to accelerate development is not yet a reality on the continent. This is also why we, Arterial Network, are working to popularize the successful experience of local development of Ségou in Mali with culture in order to inspire the many. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre Clavé Mabiala. Merci beaucoup de votre intervention. Very strong, and also giving good examples like Ségou,
yes,
to inspire not only African cities, but cities all over the world. Merci.
Merci.
The next speaker is Robert Manchin, President of Culture Action Europe. Dear Robert, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jordi. Thank you, dear panelists. Thank you, everybody. I'm representing Culture Action Europe, which is a network of European cultural organizations and networks who are advocating access to arts and participation in culture as a fundamental right of every citizen. Well, our main message usually for policymakers is that culture is at the heart of the response for any policy field, and not only for a sectoral problem for culture or for the sake of artists, but for the society as a general. So this is a natural that we have been participating in all joint efforts for sustainable goals. And the same way, culture is at the heart of the response, we believe, to multiple crises. So we have been talking about, of course, primarily a health crisis, but this is much more than a health crisis. We are undergoing a very basic shift in the underlying foundations of how we have organized our economic life, our social life, and we see the ruptures all the way to the political field, shaking the very foundations, and including the supporting infrastructures, which we came to believe are permanent for culture as well. So I don't want to preach for the convert, and you all know the problems, and we have heard that before. I think we have a common responsibility at the same time to try to think about try to think about the future, try to think about and have the, I would say, the audacity of after this humiliating experience that we still have to have promoting hope. We still have to promote thinking of possibility for planning for a future, even as we are saying SDG 30. We know that the 30 will be sooner here than we have been thinking before. And we have a fundamental role to promote resilience, both for individual level and for community level as well. And this is not really empty promises of a cultural sector that we can contribute here, and a sector which is in mortal danger, really, in terms of how we have organized ourselves so far. But we have made globally a very heartwarming examples of what does it mean that we have a power of culture to build communities, to promote a sense-making ability, as we are saying in our memorandum, capacities to jointly imagine a new future. We are underestimating the importance of participation, not just in art. I mean, just this week's economists were quoting that in the US, you have about 40 million people. And we know from one of our members has 38 million members in Europe who are weekly participating in a choir practice. That's just in the US and Europe, 80 million people weekly. These people cannot come together for their weekly community binding, which is much more than just music making. It's really community building. And when we are talking about healthy and resilient communities, it's a lot of this type of small communities which are contributing to all what you have been talking about, the health effects, to the social binding forces, both on local, on national, and global level. So culture, when we are talking about what can we promote to achieve other policy goals, I would say not just other policy goals. We can contribute to rethink and to help to imagine this future. We see that politicians are at the end of their imagination, so to speak. And we have a big responsibility here. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Robert, for your forward-looking words. And I think that we all share what you say, and probably we also share that this voice of the cultural networks, actors, sectors should be louder so that it reaches those that are in the capacity to take decisions on the survival of the cultural sectors, and also on the impact that cultural practices provide to all people around the world. Thank you again, Robert. The next speaker is Victoria Okogie, representing the International Federation of Libraries Associations and also the Nigerian Library Association. Victoria, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. I will be speaking on the importance of incorporating culture, including cultural concerns and cultural actors, into development policy planning. Within the short time that I have, I would like to set the context of libraries as cultural institutions, explore libraries and development, and finally, make the case for libraries as viable development partners in policy planning. Now, looking at libraries, the context of libraries, there are over 430,000 public libraries globally. That is one for every 15,000 people. In addition, there are hundreds of thousands of academic and national libraries with unique heritage and research collections, and over 1 million school libraries, helping to build literacy and broaden horizons. Also, libraries are guardians of documentary heritage containing thoughts, ideas, and expressions. Equally important is the fact that they are a starting point for new creativity and innovation, even just to get online. And as we all know, libraries provide community spaces freely available to all as a part of the social infrastructure. Therefore, libraries must be taken into consideration for meaningful policy planning. In terms of development, it is obvious where creativity has allowed, there has been a successful pivot to digital environment. Of course, this isn't the case everywhere. As we know, people without connections, especially those in developing countries, have been at particular risk of isolation. Therefore, any digital policy needs to focus also on content, which is what creators and cultural institutions like libraries provide. Nonetheless, people have obviously missed their libraries in these times, partly because they have lost access to culture, but also because of the sense of community, programming, and skills that libraries offer. In essence, there are various ways in which we can ensure that documentary heritage and libraries are engaged in both the response to COVID-19 and longer-term development planning. And I will just mention 4 of them. First of all, we need governments at all levels to see culture and cultural institutions as both a source of vital information and insights to inform policy, as well as a partner in delivering its policy decisions. Libraries can, for example, work with those responsible for health and well-being, for employment, education, and digital inclusion, as have been demonstrated in many countries. Secondly, we need to include cultural issues in our calculations and indicator basis, as UNESCO is already doing. The key question to ask will be, are cultural actors included upstream in decision-making? Does everyone have access to culture or documentary heritage? These questions are vital. Thirdly, we need strong signals from the highest levels, such as from the President of the United Nations General Assembly, in order to show the way. And finally, of course, we need to work within our own fields to build understanding of the potential libraries have to support development and help realize this. All of these will help incorporate libraries and other cultural institutions into development policy planning. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Very strong presentation and very clear message. Nobody can understand local development progress without libraries having a central role. Thank you very much again, Victoria. The next panelist is Maria Claudia Parias Duran, board member of the International Music Council and executive president of the Fundación Nacional Batuta in Colombia. María Claudia, tienes la palabra.
Jordi, muchas gracias. Good afternoon for everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm here talking in representation of the International Music Council and the Secretary General Sylvia Fisher. As you all know, the International Music Council advocates for musical rights in the world and is strongly committed with this idea that music is part of the daily life of everyone and is a mechanism that makes us join this idea that we are humans and that we have a memory and a way of expression in our daily lives. As Americans for the Arts said in 2017, we think that arts are fundamental to our humanity. They ennoble and inspire us, fostering creativity, goodness, and beauty. The arts brings us joy, helps us express our values, and build bridges between cultures. The arts are also a fundamental component of a healthy community, as many of you have said, strengthening them socially, educationally, and economically, benefits that exist even in difficult social and economic times. In its holistic approach to music as an ecosystem, the International Music Council considers music as an art form and also as a product, and of course, and mainly as a tool for social change. We acknowledge the value of music in reaching and inspiring those who engage in it. As an art form, music has contributed and continues to contribute immensely to the world's legacy, building a rich heritage that preserves and celebrates the diversity of our cultural identities. Music can also serve as a tool that promotes individual development and brings changes to many levels of society. It's a great unifier of people, a natural vehicle for social engagement with different processes and inclusion, and a powerful agent of democratic values. Finally, music is also involved in a variety of products that contribute to domestic and international trade, of course, and economic growth and job creation all over our nations. In all of its manifestations, music is a tremendously precious resource for humanity. The past few months have demonstrated that we, as culture and creative operators, are something that we already knew. We are resourceful, we are resilient and inventive even in these very hard times. Let me share some examples of the relevance of culture for sustainable development as a society. Culture can improve individual well-being, first of all. During the lockdown, billions of people were and are turning to culture, and notably to music, as a source of comfort, well-being, and connection. For many of us, music is, in its varied forms, a very important place, or occupies a very important place in our lives at home. Yes, the music community has responded. Musicians were also at the forefront as they wrote and produced songs to raise awareness and call on populations to adopt distancing and sanitary measures and attitudes to stop the spread of the virus. The mobilization of musicians and music professionals in my region, Latin America, but also in Africa, to give two examples, was just overwhelming with respect to this idea. We do believe in the International Music Council that culture can unify communities regardless of age, race, or ethnicity. You will remember watching members of choirs, as Robert said, orchestras, chamber ensembles, and bands create together, even though playing in their own homes and communicating in very innovative ways in order to produce music and to create music and to give us the opportunity to benefit from this creation and to create new musical experiences for the enjoyment of a lot of people. Of course, as you know, we believe that culture can improve academic performance in the individual and the collective levels also, especially in communities like the ones in the third world. Culture, of course, strengthens economy, and it's a good for local business, but also for local development. It drives tourism, and it's also the place where creativity and innovation acts in the most profound way. So we have a lot of reasons to believe that culture and artistic practices are a very important tool for the development of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Claudia. Also, very strong message on the role that music plays in human rights, in development. And let me also raise awareness to all participants on the existence of the charter, your charter of 5 rights, music rights, which is an excellent document that they are proving that they can be implemented with your outstanding work in all continents. Muchas gracias, Maria Claudia. We have been together 1 hour and a half. I kindly ask you to stay together for 5 more minutes. I will give the floor to our final panelist, Nikiesha Hamilton. The high-level political forum takes place in New York, and Nikiesha works for the Brooklyn Museum in New York. We are very sorry not being able to be in your wonderful city. We will in the future, hopefully. Nikiesha, thank you for being here with us today. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It is a true honor to be a part of this conversation. So I am the head of government and community relations at the Brooklyn Museum. And on top of that, I am born and raised in Brooklyn, right 4 or 5 blocks away from the museum. So I understand, you know, from a 360 view, how important culture and arts are to us, to the young people, and how important it is to preserve it. So what's interesting about the Brooklyn Museum is that we are in central Brooklyn, and we're located in the heart of a very diverse community, a very diverse borough in New York City. Brooklyn is the 2nd most diverse borough in New York City, and meaning in America. And I like to say that culture is like football, and football has culture, right? So everyone can participate in it. It is important that we protect it, because protection of culture is ensuring that it is, and ensuring that it is a 4th pillar to the Sustainable Development Goals, whatever we do when incorporating in policy. We know that culture is a way of diversifying the way we connect to people, and also preserving various persons' lives, traditions, and cultural heritage. So one thing about the impact of COVID-19 on Brooklyn, and what we have seen, is that COVID-19 has exacerbated all issues in our society. And so culture never closed in New York City. However, because we do not have the proper equitable frameworks to ensure that culture is preserved and that we are adequately investing in our cultural institutions, we face cultural institutions closing all across the world. And so I think that having arts and culture are critical elements of an equitable framework. They reflect the power of communities, as we have highlighted. If you are able to harness the soft power of the community, then we're able to influence structural oppression and change and accomplish these sustainable development goals. So without equity, neighborhood revitalization can improve a physical place, but displace people and stifle broad creativity, and bring economic benefit to only a few, which leads to a homogenous society, community, and displacement of culture. The tools of arts and culture can accelerate equity, build communities of opportunity, and design for broadly shared prosperity through the creative economy. Right now, what we see is that we're not adequately investing in culture. Philadelphia had no money during COVID relief given to culture. And Philadelphia is a hub, a cultural hub. Everybody knows what Philadelphia is for. Sorry to those who are from the UK, but that's where our Declaration of Independence was written. But it's important that we use our power, use our influence to make sure that government from the local level to the international level invest in these frameworks. For us, talking about Brooklyn Museum, how we have pivoted in supporting the community. Brooklyn Museum is a large space, so today we have a food distribution site. We are using our social media, our artworks to communicate the importance of the census, which allocate funds to our city and to Brooklyn. And Brooklyn specifically has one of the lowest count for a population over 500,000. There are 3 million people in Brooklyn. And the fact that we're not getting the proper funds being allocated to our community means that there's not proper resources allocated to hospitals, schools, or cultural institutions and libraries. So we've been using our platform in order to communicate that and communicate food insecurity and how there has been a cuts to arts education. So all that to say is that we know that arts and culture is able to, has this powerful soft power. It's how people know about countries, it's how people know about communities, it's how people know about Brooklyn. And it is important that we think critically about how do we infuse art and culture and creative lenses to our policy frameworks, because when we diversify, I don't know if people can hear me, I know people are paused. But when we diversify the way we incorporate art and creativity into how we look at policy, it helps us connect with the community in a way that the community can see themselves in that policy. I love how the presentation earlier that Ege showed the different pictures and images of how culture is at the forefront, is in our face. So when we're thinking about utilizing that and how we incorporate that into our policies, people can see that they are accountable to these changes, because we have to preserve our traditions. We have to preserve our culture. So I give my time back. Thank you so much for your time. I really did enjoy learning so much about the international world. And I think that this is the time and the framework to work together to think about how we can push things forward.
Thank you very much, Nikiesha. I think it has been a wonderful event. We have all learned a lot. Thank you very much, Ege, Stephen, Ilaria, Ernesto, Jose Alfonso, Dr. Duncan, Dr. Fancourt, Pierre Clavé, Robert, Victoria, Maria Claudia, and again, Nikiesha. And a special gratitude to Mr. Jerobiam Shah Anika for staying with us during all the event. We are extremely honored to have had you during the whole event. And if you want to send the final message of 30 seconds before we conclude the event, you are invited to do so.
No, thank you very much, dear colleagues. I was able to learn a lot from you. And I can only say that let's continue this effort. Culture is very important in our life. It plays important role. And it is whatever we do and toward the achievement of the goal that we set ourselves, culture is at the center of it. So I wish you all and have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shah Anika. We apologize, we don't have time for questions. We have taken note. Sometimes some questions are very difficult, so we have written them in our notebooks, and we promise we will address those difficult questions in our next event. Before we go, please be assured that we, the cultural network of the campaign Culture 2030 goal, we want to make sure that this is also your campaign. So please visit our website, endorse our statement, disseminate the statement to your circles, make concrete commitments on the role of culture to achieve the SDGs, the role of culture in the pandemic COVID-19, and please stay tuned for the next steps, the next events of the campaign. Please protect yourselves, protect all the people around you, stay safe, healthy, and creative. Thank you very much.